Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Modern Trumpeter podcast. In today's episode, we will be talking to Bob Malone about his experience as a freelancer, but also primarily as an instrument designer and technician for Yamaha. As part of the Modern Trumpeter book, there will, of course, be several chapters on different aspects of the playing side of a career with different styles, tunes to learn, different opportunities, etc., etc. But there will also be sections and chapters devoted to topics such as this: different career paths, different experiences, and different opportunities within the music industry that you can look into and be a part of. Here's a little bit more about Bob Malone. Bob Malone has spent almost 40 years designing and modifying trumpets. 21 of those years were spent working for Yamaha directly. He has become known for his design collaborations with such artists as Bobby Shew and Wayne Bergeron, among many others. But beyond the artist credits to his name, he has also helped change how Yamaha develops instruments. Instead of designing a prototype and seeking artist input later, he has helped pioneer the process of consulting first with the artist. He was brought onto Yamaha in 2001 and was essential to the creation of the Xeno artist model line of B-flat and C trumpets, and has also been able to work with orchestral greats John Hagstrom, David Bilger, Thomas Rolfs, Robert Sullivan, Tom Hooton, Chris Martin, and many others. He has also provided wind instrument technical support to Tower of Power, Snarky Puppy, and Big Bad Voodoo Daddy. So without further ado, here is our interview with Bob Malone. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Modern Trumpeter. Today we're talking with Bob Malone, a former Yamaha employee and designer of all things trumpet. And did you design more than trumpets as well, Bob?
Well, in my job with Yamaha, in the beginning especially, I was directly involved with any development project having to do with brass. So I uh, did trombone, worked with Pete Sullivan, for instance, to help design the very first Xeno trombone. So it's mostly trumpets, but all the other brass instruments. Then later, I became director of the ateliers. We had two, one in New York and one in Buena Park. I oversaw development of all wind instruments and drums. So
Wow.
a lot of different projects going on.
Yeah. Big job. Are you a trumpet player?
Yeah, I went to school studying music. I was a trumpet performance major at University of Southern California. I have my degree in trumpet performance, and so my hope was at the time to be playing in an orchestra someplace and making my career out of performance.
And so did you grow up in California, or kind of what was your first musical experience, and kind of at what point did you want to make music a career?
Well, like many others, started off in a school music program. And I think we started in fifth grade. And I walked into the music parent night where you go in and pick out an instrument and all of that. And I think I originally wanted to play drums, but I don't know how, but I ended up walking from the room with the trumpet in my hands, and fate was sealed from there. So that my first experience was through school music.
We all, so many of us start out there, and I have tons of friends who, they did it for just for fun and
Mhm.
quit after high school and stuff, and as many people do. What was the moment where you were like, yeah, I think I want to pursue this in college and be a trumpet player?
Well, I was very fortunate in that playing trumpet was easy for me. I developed a good sound right away. It came very, very easy. So I was involved at that point in every musical group in my local area. I grew up uh, actually grew up on a Navy base out in Southern California, China Lake, and uh, that that Navy base had quite a big civilian population with professional people. So lots of scientists and engineers. My father was an electrical engineer. And along with that came an appreciation for the arts and music, and a lot of support for those kinds of things in the area. I played all the typical things you would do through a school music program, but also the community had a pretty robust musical theater group. And I played in the pits for a lot of those, all of that typical kind of thing. But when I got out of high school, I actually looked at pursuing a career. Uh, History has always been something that's been a passion of mine, and I thought maybe I would be a history major. I music was me. So I ended up going to Bakersfield College, which had also a very strong music program and was involved in all of those groups. President of the concert band, marching band, played in all the brass ensembles, the jazz ensemble, sang in the choir, and I ended up graduating as the honored graduate out of the music department for that school. So at that point, I was pretty clearly on a musical path. And then from there, I went to University of Southern California, and things accelerated from there and had great teachers. Tom Stevens is really my musical mentor. I started off with Walter Larson, who, if many of you probably know Malcolm McNabb, and Malcolm studied with Walter also. Walter's musical background included being a student of Herbert L. Clark. So it was kind of that lineage. And then from there, studied with Tom Stevens, who also introduced me to Jimmy Stamp. So I studied with them both at the same time. At that point, I was, kind of on my way. That path was pretty solid for me in terms of music and performance at that point.
Yeah, that sounds like it. What happened next?
Okay. Well, out of school, so in Los Angeles, there was a lot of music going on, and so I started working on developing a performance career as a freelance trumpet player, and did a lot of work. Played with the Pasadena Chamber Orchestra, lots of church jobs. Some small recording sessions, that kind of thing. But then I got hooked into Disneyland and their music program and worked there part-time initially, uh, as part of the fanfare trumpet unit. Um, that was a union job, so I joined the musicians union. And then it worked out so well. Disney liked us so much that they hired us full-time to do the 25th anniversary of Disneyland. That was in 1980. And then from there, they flew us various places to events. It reverted kind of back to a seasonal job, but that's where I met Wayne Bergeron. We played together, Andy Martin, lots of players. Met Gordon Goodwin there. It was a great starting point for a lot of musicians that have gone on to establish great careers.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it started.
I've heard so many stories, especially of Disneyland players, where all these iconic people that everybody knows, like they started there and the grounds for them to launch their careers and stuff. And so I think even still, there's players in those bands
Oh,
that are
sure.
just killer.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great opportunity. I really developed a lot. I came out of more of a classical environment, though I did, play in jazz bands early on, but I really focused on classical music. And after getting out into the real world, you have to be able to play a variety of things. And at Disneyland, I played mostly with commercial players and lead players. And that made me need to adapt my playing style and really helped me develop for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. And everybody I've talked to, it's you got to be able to do everything if you want to be able to make a living, especially as a freelancer.
That's right.
And it's just, every year, every decade, it's like even more. You
Right.
got to be able to do more.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
how have you seen that develop since your time kind of as a freelancer to now? Like what's different? And for any young player wanting to do a freelance career, what would you advise them on?
Well, I think you know work is not going to come to you, so it's not a matter of sitting by the phone waiting for the phone to ring. Of course, goes without saying, have to have the craft, the skills to be able to do that kind of thing. You need to network. It's really network, network, network. Be someone that other people want to be around. That's super important. I've seen great players whose careers stopped or, even declined because nobody wanted to spend time with them. They weren't fun to be around. So being a good human being is a part of it. Establishing trust so people can count on you and know that their playing is going to be supported by you. So that's fundamental to all of that. But these days, networking, being kind of aware of the politics of the area that you're in is important. They don't teach you that in school. The networking is a part of that. The other is to understand that, your career is kind of in your hands. So that with that comes a responsibility for creating those opportunities, looking at forming groups yourself, looking at what kind of music you can create that would be something other people would want to hear. Composing, whatever that might be, taking up that responsibility, even if you're a great player, waiting for things to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you touch on a little bit, like you had mentioned, kind of the politics of the area of what you're like, wherever you're at? Could you go into a little bit more depth of that and kind of what you mean by that?
Sure. I'm not going to name names or anything like that, but I have seen people, for instance, in LA who are really good players who, in the instance of kind of moving into the area and wanting to start to get work, get really aggressive at contacting contractors and things like that. And that really, for the few individuals that I can think of right off the bat, that didn't go well. uh, you have to be respectful of the players that are there and have established careers. And again, network and, make friends and be respectful, wait your turn, that kind of thing. But there were players that I know of who got really aggressive with self-promotion and things like that. And it really didn't go over well with the people that were doing the work. And so when you do that and people see what you're doing, you're not going to get called or recommended, for playing opportunities that might come up. Whereas if you do it right and establish those relationships, those professional relationships, and they're based on trust and mutual respect, when the opportunity comes up, you're probably going to get a chance to do that. So I would say that's a really important aspect, something to understand. Yeah, it's just being aware of your environment, and being respectful.
Yeah, 100%. I've heard that from so many players, and yeah, I can think of players in my area as well where they don't have a great reputation for things they've done or how they've treated others, and it's
Yeah.
unfortunate.
And there are other instances where, players have been in the area, they're getting the opportunities to play, and then they start, throwing knives, that doesn't go very far. And when you get a reputation like that, then, your career is not going to go anywhere. There's always going to be a player that's more influential than you, and making enemies by trying to undercut somebody who, in a couple of instances that I know of, players that have helped this person get into a section or get into a playing opportunity. And then if the player that recommended them is not sitting in the section, maybe they hired that person as a substitute, that substitute then starting to undermine and trying to create an opportunity for themselves, has not gone over well. Again, if you want to just distill it down into one word, respect is the best word that I can think of. Be a good colleague, establish
Yeah,
trust, show respect.
yeah. I'm gonna put that in the book somewhere. Just exactly what you said. Respect. That's all you need. Okay, and so what was the transition from maybe this freelance career into your time with Yamaha? What brought that on?
Well, you can imagine as a young player trying to establish a career that you probably are going to need another source of income. So I needed a part-time job, and I was very fortunate that one of my roommates worked for Larry Minnick, who was a very noted brass instrument designer and repair person in Southern California. He had a shop in West Los Angeles. So my roommate invited me to come over. He talked to Larry about me. I had no skills at all. And to be honest with you, there was no good reason for him to hire me. But for whatever reason, he did. And I started working for him initially part-time. And it was a kind of a learn from the master mentorship, that kind of thing. So Larry would show me some basic things to do. He would then give me an instrument to work on, keeping, especially in the beginning, keeping an eye on me. And it turned out I kind of had a knack for it, and I really enjoyed it. So I started off working for him as a brass instrument repair guy. And from there, because of my trumpet playing career, as my skills developed as a repair technician, and being around Larry, who was a real innovator and a designer himself, and he was not afraid of anything, take on these huge projects. So it was kind of unavoidable with my passions, as my skills got better and being around a creative person like that I would want to try some things myself. So I started looking at how I could improve my own trumpets. And long story short, I did a lot of different kinds of experiments in that area, but I really started to focus on lead pipes as a way to potentially solve some of the problems that came along with C trumpets at the time that had a lot of built-in issues with intonation and color changes and, things like that. So my routine would be to get into Larry's shop very early in the morning. I had a key. So I would get there at 6 o'clock in the morning. I would practice for an hour and a half. And then until the shop opened, that was kind of my time to experiment with different kinds of lead pipe designs, test. I think I probably tested, as a player, and then measured every lead pipe taper I could get my hands on. And then that led to a concept that I had that I thought would work in solving some intonation problems on C trumpets. And turned out that that was a good thing and it did help. And then I wanted to do more with that, had an idea for a particular kind of lead pipe taper. And being around Larry, seeing him make, things like bell mandrels from scratch, from trombone lead pipes, tuba lead pipes. I started, one of the jobs I had was to build a drawbench. So I built the drawbench that we used to pull trombone lead pipes and trombone slide tubes. He taught me how to make bells, was gaining skills in all that area. So when it came time to make my own, I had seen it done before, and I just went after it and created my own lead pipe taper and started pulling pipes and learning how to pull pipes. And at the same time, I was still playing, but the demands on my repair side and modification side started to kind of eclipse my playing. And I can remember being out at Disneyland playing in I think 87, where I really felt like what I was meant to do was not to continue as a player, but I could have more impact on the trumpet community, brass community by going all in on the brass design side, their side. And in 1987, I made a conscious decision to stop actively pursuing a playing career. It was kind of forced on me because Larry decided he was going to semi-retire. They sold their house in Santa Monica, was going to close the shop, moved up to Cambria, beautiful place. And at that point, I had to decide what I was going to do. So I decided to go all in. I picked up half of his space and rented it, started buying my own equipment, and that's how that transition happened.
That's so cool. So you had zero experience when you started.
When I first started, I don't know, maybe engineering is part of the DNA. My father was an engineer. And then looking back as me as a kid, I really enjoyed taking things apart to see how they worked. I wasn't always that good about putting them back together again, but there was that curiosity, building things and whatnot. That's something I had always done. So this was kind of a coming together of, it was a fortunate opportunity, really kind of luck between meeting Larry and having that opportunity. And then my relationship with Tom Stevens is really the reason that my career took off on the brass design side. He was a very big supporter of the work that I did and a big part of any kind of design that I'd done and experiments and testing and feedback. I had the best in him to give me that kind of information and feedback.
That's super cool. So this is all before Yamaha. You're
That was
just
before Yamaha. Yep. Yeah. In 1987 is when I officially started Bob Malone's brass technology. So I had a business in Los Angeles, and it started off just me, and then I started adding employees. The business really grew. A large part of that, again, from Tom Stevens kind of spreading the word, and Tom was playing the trumpets that I'd modified for him. I started getting interest from Europe. The lead pipes caught on, got dealers interested in having them. And I outgrew my little shop and took on a three times the space closer to my home in the valley in Van Nuys, right next to the airport. And that continued on. The business grew. I had international business. I made trumpets and sent lead pipes and parts all over the world to players all over the world. And then that attracted the attention of Yamaha. So I first met Kenzo Kawasaki in the middle 1980s when he came over to show the very first Xeno trumpet, C trumpet prototypes, and met with Tom Stevens. And then I eventually got a call from him asking if I might want to join him and Yamaha in designing a trumpet for Bobby Shew. And that then we did all of the prototyping in my shop in West Los Angeles, and then finished it in the first year that I moved out to Van Nuys in my new shop. So that was my first development project with Yamaha. And, a few other things helped. And they brought me on as a dealer. So I had really developed a very strong relationship with Yamaha before I joined them officially as an employee.
wow, yeah. Well, that Bobby Shoehorn has been a hit for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, yeah, we're into several generations now, and flugelhorn, the Z flugelhorns, that led to a lot of really great things happening.
Yeah, yeah. One of the Shoe is one of my favorite horns that I've played. Big fan.
Yeah, thank you.
Like you said, as a young freelancer, you gotta have some sort of income coming in while you're working on it. But then hearing how you could even just pivot and just go into this whole new avenue of the music industry with little experience, and then turn out that it was turned out really well for you. I think it's important for these young players to also understand that they can go that route too, or it doesn't have to be trumpet playing and that's all you're going to do. For some people, yeah, maybe, but for many other players who are also great, like another passion or another avenue in music can be equally as fulfilling or rewarding.
Yeah, I think, discovering what your passions and strengths are, and going with that is, that's a recipe for success for sure.
So as your business was growing over the years, how much business and international business experience did you have, and how did you develop over the years and help grow the business?
Well, as I said, Tom Stevens had such a huge reputation internationally and very well connected. His key group of friends, his core group of friends, were really the best, some of the best players and teachers in Europe, and also connected with Jean-Pierre Montez, who started the Brass Bulletin. And that hasn't been published in quite a long time now, but that was probably the premier publication for brass players. It was translated into several different languages. It had incredible research behind the articles. And Jean-Pierre published a little story on me, and that helped to spread the word in different places. Really, in the beginning, it was all word of mouth. That, sort of goes back to what our first discussion about how do you establish a career. Do good work, be a good person, show respect. And that's what I always tried to do, no matter whose horn it was that I was working on, who that person was. I always try to do my best. And I treated everybody in the same way. And so that brought people over from Europe to want to work with me. And a fun story to tell on that was getting a call from Tom saying there were two young trumpet players from Europe who wanted to come over and study with him. One was going to stay a couple of weeks and the other a month, and ask if they could stay with me. And I said, sure. Those two players happen to be Håkan Hardenberger and Marcus Stockhausen. And that started a lifelong friendship with them. And that started my work, especially with Håkan. So he had come from New York with a brand new Bach trumpet at the time. I put lead pipe, my MC1 lead pipe on it, and that started not only our friendship, but our collaboration professionally and musically. And his first CD, picture of that trumpet with that lead pipe on a piano. And then, of course, I did several trumpets for him. I made the very first medium large version of the DE flat trumpet conversion that I had been doing with the kind of the S-shaped lead pipe, and gold plated it, and that's one of his favorite trumpets. And then eventually when I joined Yamaha and I was working on developing what became the first artist model trumpet, the Chicago artist model C trumpet, Håkan happened to be in Toronto playing with the Toronto Symphony, and I built a prototype for him to try. And I went up there and let him try it. He absolutely fell in love with it. I actually wanted to use it on the concert, and I convinced him that let's not do that. And I took it back. It wasn't finished. It was still pretty raw, and took it back and finished it and silver plated it, and then ended up flying to meeting up with my colleague Thomas Lubitz from Europe. He was part of the Frankfurt Atelier and head of the Frankfurt Atelier at the time. And we met up with Håkan at his little country house, Swedish farmhouse with a thatched roof, and officially presented it to him. And that started off Håkan playing Yamaha C trumpets. So it kind of went from there. But anyway, that's a fun little story.
Yeah, that's super cool. Do you still have your Bob Malone Technologies business, or did you end up selling it when you went to Yamaha?
Well, I couldn't do both. It was an either or, situation. So I closed it down. I didn't actually sell it off. I sold assets from it and just, shuttered, closed the door, and moved to Michigan. Sold our house, and my wife and I moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and thought we were going to be there for the duration. And we were there, as I said earlier, 6 years. And then I'd been working out of, it's called Yamaha Musical Products. It was a factory that Yamaha had in Grand Rapids that put together mostly student instruments for the North American market, some intermediate instruments. And they built a custom shop there at the time. And so that's what I worked out of, doing R&D on professional instruments, but based out of Grand Rapids. When that facility was closed down, that's when we were looking at other places to build another R&D facility. And long story short, decided on building it in Buena Park at the corporate headquarters. Then it became the Atelier, and that's when we moved back to California.
And then how long did you work for Yamaha for?
Well, I mean, the relationship, of course, goes back to the mid 1980s, and with those projects, I did some other things with him as well back in those days. But as an official employee, I started pretty early on in 2001. I think it was, I want to say it was February or March 2001, and then retired in July of 2022 and shifted over to a consultant. And I'm working under a consultant agreement with Yamaha.
So you've been a part of designing the Wayne's trumpet, the Bergeron, the Chicago, the New York, the Eric Miyashiro horn as well?
No, that one I didn't do. Eric worked with a designer in Japan on that one. I think in all total, with all the different brass instruments, over 40 anyway, different trumpet, trombone, French horn projects worked on. But trumpets, the Z trumpet, the New York C and B flat, Chicago C and B flat, and then what became a variation of the New York. So I had a chance to work with, in the beginning, with John Hagstrom, Bob Sullivan, and then shifting over to David Bilger, Tom Rolfs, Tom Hooton, Wayne Bergeron, Peter Sullivan, Andy Martin, Wycliffe Gordon. Um, you know, um, it's been a kind of a fun ride for sure, and working with incredible players.
But yeah, absolutely. As you've designed all these different models and trumpets, uh, what's the main difference between them, I guess, or things that they were designed for? Maybe we take, for example, the Chicago versus the New York. Like, what's the design process for each, and kind of the vision for each?
Well, the whole artist model series started off with the Chicago. One of the reasons Yamaha hired me was to help them really get some traction in the professional orchestral market amongst those players. At the time, there weren't very many players playing Yamaha in orchestras. I don't think there were any in the top orchestras. LA Philharmonic might be an exception to that. And then there were a scattering of great players, playing Yamaha. Jim Wilt, played Yamaha, before coming to the LA Philharmonic. In, the top orchestras, it was really dominated by Bach for the most part. So because I had kind of come up with a design that had pretty good traction with a lot of players all over the world. When Yamaha hired me, it was kind of low-hanging fruit to take the concept that I developed and see if we could really create a production version of that. And because Chicago was very close to Grand Rapids, and because John Hagstrom, I had worked with him since he was a student at Eastman, and we were very good friends. It's just kind of made sense, and he was willing and able to kind of join me in that effort. That's when we started. So we started off with actually the first thing that we did was to take a set of Xeno trumpets to Chicago and the Chicago Symphony and get feedback on where they stood, as they were. And then from there, looking at the very famous set of Mount Vernon C trumpets that the Chicago Symphony started playing in the mid-1950s. And the other part of that was, aside from Bud Herseth, who was still playing principal trumpet at the time, all of the other trumpet players were playing on those trumpets with my lead pipes on them. That was another reason to kind of, go in that direction. They were all playing on MC lead pipes. So we started down that path, and like all the development projects that I've been involved with, it's not going in with a preconceived idea. It's being completely open with where it could go, and really listening to the player and listening to the needs of the player and the ensemble. And that's what really guides the project, not trying to take an idea and sort of force your way to make it work. And because John had been playing on my conversions, it was and because the orchestra section, for the most part, was playing on my lead pipes, it just kind of headed in that direction. And we ended up with the Chicago as it was. With the New York, and working with Bob Sullivan, who initially was playing in the New York Philharmonic, that orchestra was playing on trumpets that were more traditional design. And so, in trying to create a trumpet that would work in the New York Philharmonic and with Bob, it needed to go in that direction. So the big differences between the two were arrived at because we were listening to the needs of the player and, their need to play a certain style of instrument in that ensemble. And so the differences between the two are really, they use the same bell, except for the YM bell version, which Tom Rolfs and the Boston Symphony is playing. And that came about because of their needs and the needs of Symphony Hall and the historic relationship that trumpet players had with a certain kind of bell design that worked well in that hall over years and decades and decades. But anyway, Chicago and New York used basically the same bell. The main difference was the front end, the lead pipe. So the MC1, traditional MC1 that I designed, is essentially a reverse lead pipe with a kind of an an interesting innovation on the end with that extra oversleeve that I built. And that was there primarily to solve a problem of where do you put the bell brace, the front bell brace. And that a bell brace position is very important on trumpets. With a reverse lead pipe, without that oversleeve, you would have to move the bell brace much further back on the bell, which causes a lot of problems. It's not optimal. So the MC1 lead pipe also has kind of more of a variable taper, but it's more of a gradual taper versus the New York, which is a shorter taper and uses an MC2 lead pipe, which has a much different taper profile. It opens up much more quickly. And it's more similar to the style of lead pipe that players playing a more traditional design would be used to, though it's been optimized for response and good intonation and consistent color throughout the registers, that kind of thing. So it's mostly the lead pipe and tuning slide, which is the difference between the two. There are some other small differences. Chicago trumpets use a little brace in the first valve slide, which is something that Bach did mostly in the 1950s and the earlier Bach C trumpets. We utilize a narrower bracing set, which was similar to the old vintage horns of the mid 50s. Both New York and Chicago's utilize that. The bells use a French style bell bead, which was also something that was used in the mid 1950s. We put the bell seam on the side rather than underneath. We utilize a lot of the design concepts that were from those vintage horns, but not to say that we did an exact copy, because those instruments had some problems and we didn't want to just duplicate a problem. So it was taking what was good about them and then trying to come up with solutions that would overcome the issues that those instruments presented. But those are the main differences.
It's so cool to hear you just talk about like all these like little specifics, and like the one little thing can change everything else about the horn, and like wow.
Yeah, it really does come down to small, tiny details, and start trying to understand how they all interact, because any instrument design is like playing three-dimensional chess. Everything affects everything else. And so the challenge is, when you come up with something that has a big improvement, is how do you hold on to that and yet, change other parts of it so that you solve the other problems that are still existing. And it's, that's a big challenge. And it comes down to small little details. And my career path has been trying to learn how all of those interactions, what differences they make, understanding how shape changes can affect sound and response and that kind of thing. Even if a part is the same weight, same material, but you slightly change the shape of something and how that affects all that. It's fun, it's challenging, has its frustrations. There's a learning curve involved for sure. But the evolution of all of these models, from whether it be from the Z, what started out the 6310Z to the 8310Z2 to the first gen Chicago's, through the third gen, and now the BR versions of those trumpets. It's been a learning, constant learning, for me and for everybody else who's worked on these projects.
It sounds like a steep learning curve, but also a fun challenge at the same time.
Absolutely.
Do you know of any resources for, say, young players wanting to start getting into doing this, and maybe they're working at a shop and getting that experience? Is there any books online or YouTube channels or any resources that you're aware of that a young player could start looking into if they might not have an opportunity to work at a shop?
Well, there are a few repair schools to look at. Red Wing is one. What I'll do is I'll try to pull, it's not a long list, but I'll try to pull a list together and I can send that to you. But the repair school route is one. Wayne Tanabe, who is, probably maybe the top brass technician in the US right now, tops in the world in a lot of ways. Started off going through that kind of a program. Jim Becker, who is our resident brass technician in New York at Yamaha Auto Services in New York. I want to say he went through a repair school as well. Not sure if that's true or not, but it could have been like me, a mentorship, apprenticeship kind of thing. That's a possibility. Tomoji Hirokata, who has become sort of the guru of all things woodwind, especially clarinets and saxophones. Actually, I shouldn't even specify. He went through the repair school in the Yamaha house in Hamamatsu. So that's a pretty good career path. And as school of music still remains strong. There is a need for repair technicians for sure, for good ones. And all of these dealers that service these schools need good repair technicians.
Yeah, that's true. It's the kind of thing you don't necessarily think about when it's like trumpet careers, like fixing the trumpets or designing trumpets. And yeah, you had your own shop. Do you know Mike Del Quadro, trumpet designer and builder in Vegas?
Yeah, I don't know him personally, but of course I've heard his name.
I first played some of his horns at ITG this year at Salt
Hmm.
Lake, and I was like, "Whoa, this is
Hmm.
just fell in love with horns." And went down to his shop. We worked through stuff and how he wanted how I played and his designs, and I'm going to be getting a custom trumpet from his in February, roughly. So I'm looking
Great.
forward to that.
All right, great.
Yeah, so it's like it's cool that he got his thing going on, and Trent Austin, and the list goes on and on. And these guys are doing their own things, either reselling, designing custom horns, or repair
Yeah,
shops.
there are definitely opportunities in all those areas. And then there are others, recording industry. One of my dear friends, Marty Fenton Freer, she and her husband Rob Freer, who is I think head of the winds department at Cal State Long Beach, and a great trumpet player, one of the original members of the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra. But both of them did a lot of music copying. It was really back in the day when it was done by hand. And then, so there's music copying. Marty transitioned over to work as a librarian in the LA Philharmonic. There's music business schools out there, that would be a good thing to look into. If your passion is music recording, get to know some people that are really good at that in the business, and maybe that's a career path for you as well. And then I've had others where they have gone completely different directions, but still hung on to their playing careers, whether one of my dear friends, Mike Plumley, who I met playing at Disneyland. He played in Buddy Rich's band. He had quite a great playing career going, and then he became an attorney, and he's still playing. So there are lots of examples of great players that have gone in different directions. Some holding on to their playing as a passion for them. Others just sort of shifting directions, like what I did.
Yeah, yeah. There's so many ways, and so I'm gonna have a chapter that's dedicated to here's like other things you can do besides
Uh-huh.
playing, and short examples and stories like this where we're talking about um, your experiences and whatnot. Is there anything you know now that you wish you knew as a young trumpet player when you were in college?
Gosh, yeah, the $100 billion question, right? Keeping your eyes open to other opportunities. So you may be really hyper focused going down a path, but be open for a new door that can open and not be afraid of it. I think be committed, be passionate, follow your passions for sure. But there may be passions you're not aware of that could pop up. So just keep your spidey senses, your radar on full, and see what happens. But kind of goes back to what we first talked about, which is networking is so important, and making friends based on trust and respect. Work hard to build trust with others and respect, and see what goes on. I think taking time to pull yourself out of whatever you're doing, and maybe having playtime to ideate. That's kind of an overused term these days, but um, just keep a list of things that are interesting that you come across. Read. I think reading is an incredible skill. Yeah, I used to be a big reader, and then over time, had less and less time, or I devoted less and less time to it, but have gotten back to it, but the reading that I did and the reading that I'm doing, is so important to kind of opening your horizons, inspiring you. Just expose yourself to ideas and people that maybe you're not comfortable with. Musically, if you're like only an orchestral guy, start listening to other kinds of music. Don't listen to just trumpet players. When I was studying with Tom, he told me, he said, "You want to learn how to play Bach? Go buy Pablo Casal's cello suites and listen to that. Get the music and listen to it. You'll learn more on how to play Bach by listening to him than you would listening to another trumpet player trying to play Bach." But expand your musical horizons. Keep your eyes and ears open to other possibilities.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you again, Bob, for taking some time to chat and for especially just out of the blue, who's this guy? So I appreciate it. It means a lot.
Sure, my pleasure, Dayton. It was really fun to talk with you.
Thank you. I'll send you a copy of the book when it's done.
Okay, please do. Look forward to it.
Thank you,
All right,
Bob.
you too. All right, take care. Bye-bye.